Hello and welcome to yesterday's airlines and another ranking video. In this one, we're up to October, believe it or not, and JC Wings have set out their October releases. Can you contain your excitement? That's the question. The answer is, yeah, you probably can. But it's not all bad. There's a lot of familiarity in this set of 21 models, but there is a smattering of uniqueness too. You just have to really look a bit hard to find it. And that's kind of been the theme for JC Wings so far in 2024, I admit. Lots of familiarity, lots of the second releases of a two release set in the way JC do. And there's a lot of that in this set as well. So let's get on without further ado and have a look at those. Obviously though, chuck a link on a like on the video even, and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content, and don't forget to follow me on all my other channels at Yesterday Airlines on Instagram and Facebook, and of course yesterdaysairlines.com. I've actually got a passable number of JC Wings releases this year. I think I'm up to a 10, I think. And I got 11 last year, so it's not a complete washout in terms of what they're putting out there. There are some really cool models. Having said that, this year I've got over 20 models that are made by Panda, around 30 that are made by NG, and 30 by Aero Classics, and 11 by AV400 as well. So JC Wings, yeah, it's not my most bought brand by any margin, but they are still putting out models which catch my eye, and there's at least one from this set which I'll definitely be getting. In fact, probably two from this set that I'll definitely be getting. So there is some good stuff in there, and let's get on now and find out what that is. So as I said, 21 releases, or 22 if you include the flaps up and flap down split. There's only one of those models this month. And we'll get straight into the Airbuses as we always do, beginning with a quartet of A321s, which are going to give you some serious deja vu. The first one up is Cathay Dragon, Bravo Hotel Papa Delta is the reg of the aircraft. You will not be surprised to hear that they have already made an A321neo for Cathay Dragon before. So this one is really just a re-release of that aircraft. And as always with the A321neo molds from JC Wings, which I've said so many times, you've got to pay attention to the engines. Now, the first release of this was HPB, so HP Bravo, and that was made in 2020. This one probably made around the same time. And actually, looking at the pictures, it doesn't look as horrific as it might do, but it's certainly not competing with the other A321neo made by HYJL Wings, which I already own. I'm going to put this one into Workhorse. Next up is another A321neo for an airline that you probably care about even less, and that's Long Air, or Zhejiang Long Air, from China, B325X, and just like the Cathay Dragon, they've already made the thing before. They made in 2021, they made B323 Uniform, this time around it's B325 X-Ray. And again, also, this has been made by other brands. HYJL Wings, Panda Models have both made this. I own the Panda version. So, once again, yeah, no real reason to buy this one. And the picture here, which isn't as good a photograph, I admit, for some of these JCs you can get really good pictures, for some of them you can get not such good pictures. And this one has got a not very good picture, but the model doesn't even look as good as even that previous Cathay Dragon. I'm going to put this one down into Gas Guzzler. Next up, another Neo that they've made before. That's three on the trot. And this one is Saudia. So it's in the what were considered to be the retro colours, but obviously now we know are the actual Saudia colours, which are pretty cool, actually. And this one is registered HZASAD, so Delta. But again, they've made this one previously before. They've made ASA Charlie, and they made that last year. Don't think there's any difference between the two, really. So again, it actually, again, the printing detail on this looks quite nice. You just got to be aware of the size of those engines. I'm going to put this one into Workhorse. And the last model of this quartet of A321s that you've seen before is a literal model you've seen before. This one is a restock, as it says in the list. It's Scandinavian. It's a A321 in the current scheme. It's a CEO OYKBH. Now, this model has literally been made before. It's got the same part number even, so this is just a restock. It didn't look particularly good when they put it out last time around. The cockpit window print on this one's pretty dire, and I'm going to put this one in the gas guzzlers as well. So, quick start for the first four because, hey, they've all been done before and they're not very interesting. Next up is an A330 freighter, and this one has not been made before. It is Avianca Cargo, and there have been Avianca Cargo 330 freighters before, including one by JC. They made N331QT, or at least I think they did. I haven't seen a picture of their version of it. But NG have also made that one, and it is the green liveried Avianca Cargo freighter, and that actually looks quite nice. This one is in the standard scheme with the reds, but it's got this big sticker on the back end which talks about excellence in logistics from IATA. The sticker doesn't really add anything to the scheme, to be quite honest. And I'm always just slightly annoyed by the length of the undercarriage on this mould. Take away the undercarriage here and the model looks pretty good, but it just needs to be longer on all their A330s, and this one's not doing me. I'm not liking the look of it, to be honest, that much. I'm going to put this one into Workhorse, even though it hasn't been made before. The mold's just kind of, yeah. Next is an A340-600, and when I've seen the picture which is being bandied around for this, I thought, wow, JC have got a new 340-600 mould, but that is not the case. The picture that is being used at retailers is actually a photograph of the 200 scale version, so ignore that picture. It does not actually bear any resemblance to the model that they're going to produce. The model, or the mould they're going to be using, is just that same old A340-600 with the wing seam, so it's a very old mould. And this version of it, China Eastern, with the special scheme, has been made multiple times before. And I've already got the very nice, very, very nice, in fact, Phoenix version of this Better City, Better Life scheme. So there's not really a lot going for this model. B6055 is the reg. I get the feeling this one's been sitting around in the JC warehouse for a long time, and they kind of forgotten about it, and now they're just kind of slipping it out. But yeah, I think I'll just Workhorse it as well. I mean, I could perhaps gas guzzle this. Haven't seen the pictures. To be honest, the A340-600s they've been making, they've made Mallet Aereo in 2022. They also made Conveasa that year. And to be honest, they don't look shockingly bad, even with the old mould. But when you're comparing it to the Phoenix mould, then yeah, you've got a bit of a problem there, to be honest. Now, that doesn't bring us to the end of the Airbuses, as you'll be unsurprised to hear. There are a couple of A350s this month. The first one up is a Singapore Series 900. It's 9V Sierra Mike Foxtrot. This is the 10,000th Airbus aircraft, and I do have a minor connection with this in that it was the aircraft that I flew Auckland to Singapore on when I returned to the UK a few years back. So there is a little bit of a connection here for me. It isn't the first time, though, that this aircraft has been made at 400 scale. There was an NG version made in 2020 of the same registration. And actually, looking at it, there was a version made as long ago as 2016 by JC Wings themselves, flaps up and flaps down. So it's and actually Phoenix made it in 2016 too. So SMF has been and there's loads of these, and Aviation 400 made it in 2016. So it was made in 2016, presumably when the aircraft was produced. It's been made by NG since, and this is another version. Yeah, I mean, all of those things together kind of suggest where this is going to end up going. I've talked about the A350 mold from JC. It's perfectly okay, but it's not as good as others in my opinion, and therefore, although it's better than the Phoenix. So I'm going to put this one into Workhorse as well. And so this is looking incredibly Workhorsey this month. But the last Airbus does improve things just a smidgen. It is Japan Airlines, a scheme that I've said many times I don't really appreciate. It is a Series 1000. It is registered JA02 Whiskey Juliet. So it is presumably the second 350-1000. It's the one that's got the big A350-1000 tiles in red on the back of the fuselage, which does at least spice up the scheme slightly. The reason why it is slightly more interesting is simply that it's only been announced by one other brand, and that's AV400, and that model is not available yet, just been announced. So this will be the first time this model has been released by anybody, and it's only the second time it's been announced by anyone. And the pictures, again, it looks decent in the photos that I'm seeing here. So I'm going to put this one up into High Flyer, first High Flyer of the month for the last Airbus of the month. So intrepidly we continue on into Boeing territory, and the first model here is a British 737-400, but it is a re-release of the British Midland 737-400 that they made last year. They made GOB Mike Echo, and this time round it's Mike Golf. The difference between the models is this one's got the Airline for Europe titles on it. It's not a dramatic difference, but if you're a BMA collector, you may well feel that it's worthwhile getting it. I'm on the fence here. I don't think I will. It's not a big enough difference, and the mould is not spectacular. But I'm still willing to put this one up into High Flyer. Just not enough G-Reg models being made. So, yeah, perhaps a little biased on my part there. Next up is a Cathay Pacific Cargo 747-400 freighter, and this one's BHUO. It's the Silver Bullet, and it actually is exactly the same reg as a model that they made last year. However, last year's model was interactive, and I acquired that model actually, and it's good. This one is not. And the problem there is that the non-interactive 747-400 freighter mold that JC Wings have is not a version of their new 747-400. It is instead a version of the old classic Gemini from year dot, like 1999 or something. So it comes with all the issues that mold has. Big wing seam, chunky join on the engines, relative simplicity and shape. The model doesn't look dreadful here. It looks okay, but as a non-interactive version, it doesn't really compete with the interactive one. Even if you don't like the interactive features, the mold there is substantially better. So in my universe, I understand why they've done this, but they really need to get a 400 freighter non-interactive mold going that is not like old enough to be on an archaeological site. So I'm going to put this one in the workhorse. But again, it is a slight temptation for me, but I don't think I will be getting it. It's just, yeah, it's too old. The mold looks too old for my tastes nowadays, I feel. Now, the next model up is a massive surprise, and it's partly a really good surprise and partly a slight disappointment. It's another fantasy model, and I'm not completely against fantasy models, but in this case, it's a little bit curious. This one is Flying Tigers, N748FT. They've registered the aircraft, but of course it's a fantasy. And it's a 747-8. The thing that makes it really odd is that it's a 747-8I. Now, they're pretending it's a BCF, but that's nonsense. What this, of course, should be is a 747-8 freighter, because Flying Tigers is the granddaddy of cargo airlines and was one of only two US cargo airlines of the entire regulated era up till 78. So Flying Tigers are a massively important airline for the history of cargo flying, and had a kick-ass scheme in terms of this beautiful silver body, really cool T-tail logo, stripes. In fact, the scheme here is actually their later scheme, but it looks really, really good. And they've even put the shark's mouth on the aircraft. Now, the one of their 747s did wear a shark's mouth for a while in the 70s, I think, but I think it offended the Japanese, so that they got rid of that pretty quick. But it's nonetheless, the model here looks really good. It's just so odd that it's on a 747-8I and not a 747-8F, and I just don't really understand why that is the case. You'd think that they'd use the freighter, which they've obviously got, so it just seems like an attempt at being cool and doing a cool fantasy, but they've kind of got it slightly wrong. For that reason, I'm going to put this into High Flyer. Now, fantasy models, I can usually take or leave them, and I probably will leave this one too. But I do like the concept here. Flying Tigers is certainly an airline that deserves a fantasy if you're going to produce fantasy models, but it's just odd to put it on a passenger aircraft. And one that they've even kept all the windows on. Even if it was a BCF, you'd think that they'd get rid of most of the windows. So that's weird. But still, at least it's unusual and interesting. And there's not a lot of unusual and interesting in this month's JC releases. So you got to take it where you can get it. Because the next 7478 in this release set, that is not unique or interesting. It's Polar Air Cargo. It is N858 Golf Tango, but only in April this year they released N852 Golf Tango. The aircraft are fundamentally exactly the same, so it's not even waste time talking about it and just slap it straight into Workhorse where it belongs. And we move on to some 767s, or at least a 767. But this one is another Series 400, so it's going to disappoint because I've talked about the mould so often. Now, it's interesting that JC and Gemini are both releasing on this mould almost as many models as each other. This one is N76055, so it's the United Star Alliance aircraft. And a little surprising this is in a Gemini release, but regardless, it's a largely obsolete and pointless release because it has been released by Panda models on their much superior 767-400. That was released last year, so I don't know why you buy this one over that one. The mould here is so inferior. Again, really short legs, chunky, formless engines. The rear gear is not providing that nose down attitude. The aircraft just, it just doesn't look good. And I'm going to gas guzzle this one because I've said this before. I think that I can't keep on making excuses for this mould. It's just not up to standard for a mould that is so young. And that just leaves us with a single Boeing left to discuss this month, and that is a 777, but unfortunately it's a 777 in the colours of Thai Airways. Yet again, another airline that JC have made a lot of, and unsurprisingly have also already made before for a 777-200, which is what this is. So, realistically, it's just exactly the same as the model they made in 2021. That one was TJ Bravo. This one is HSTJ Alpha. There's no real difference between the models, and so although the photos look, really quite nice because it's a lovely mold there, 777, it just looks the same, and that means Workhorse, doesn't it? That's the very definition of a Workhorse model. Okay, so we're halfway, in fact we're a bit more than halfway, we're 3/4 of the way through this release set. We're up to model 15, and so far we've had no supersonics whatsoever, and we've just had a couple of high flyers really, and even those are perhaps pushing the boundaries. I mean, when I'm given a JAL A350 high flyer, and a re-release of a British Midland 777 high flyer, then I'm slightly perhaps stretching these high flyers. Now we're into the non-Airbus Boeing territory, and we've got 6 models here which are not Airbus and Boeing. The last model I'll discuss is actually a Boeing, but it's quite unusual. First up in the non-Airbus Boeing category is an ITA Airbus A220. Now I know this is an Airbus, but it just isn't an Airbus if you get my meaning in my universe, since it really is the Bombardier C-Series and not really an Airbus product. So I've slipped it in beyond the non-Airbus. Just forgive me for that. This one's registered EIHHO. And actually I didn't realise that JC had already made an A220. They made EIHHM. And actually I'm struggling to find good pictures of the previous release. And in fact this one doesn't even have a good picture, but it does at least have a picture. It's going to be exactly the same, just a reg difference, so we're into Workhorse territory. Model number 16 is a prop, and the only one this month, but again, it is a re-release, though you might not realise that yourself. It is China Southern, it is an ATR 72, it is registered B3022, and the reason it's a re-release is because it has been made this year, exactly the same model, by Undefined Collectibles in China. So JC does have this tendency to re-release models it's made as exclusives for others if they were market specific as that Undefined Collectibles version was. So it's the same aircraft, exactly the same model as that one, not even a rebadge. There's also been a China Southern ATR made previously, 10 years ago in June 2014. Gemini made one, B3027. I own that model myself, and it's very nice. The only difference really between this one and that one, I think, is the fact this one's got aerials fitted to it. So it's not really enough of a difference in my book. You know, I'm always tempted to put it into a high flyer, but I don't really know why. It's definitely a workhorse, isn't it? If you really were collecting China Southern, you probably would have sniffed out the Undefined Collectibles release and acquired that one by now. Model 17 is an Embraer Aero Mexico Connect XA Golf Alpha Quebec, and this is another case of them having made a model previously, but the previous release not having good photos or any really obvious photos around. They made XAGAY last year, and this one is the same, just with a reg difference. The model looks fine, but it looks exactly the same as the other one. And there obviously are limitations to these E-Jet molds, but they're okay. It's just a workhorse because it's the same. Another re-release. So now we go from Embraer to Fokker, but don't get excited, even though it's a Fokker 100 and you barely get any of these in 400 scale. This one is oh so familiar. It is another Slovakian Air Force or Slovakian government Fokker 100. Now the scheme is really nice, but it is the same as the model they released last year, except that one was Bravo Yankee Bravo and this one's Bravo Yankee Charlie. So yeah, this is just workhorse all over, isn't it? Again. And there's been, an insane amount of re-releases this month, hasn't there? And the next model technically is a kind of a re-release too, but at least it's a different shade of re-release. Such a re-release that it's technically a different airline. In 2023, we had Virgin Blue on an E-Jet, and that was a really welcome little model. I really appreciated them producing that, as you probably might recall from having watched the video. They made VHZPI, and it was very nice. This one is, similar but different. It's Pacific Blue, what was the Polynesian subsidiary of Virgin Blue, and the reg on this one is VHZPM. The scheme is actually substantially different because the Pacific Blue titles, they're really big and billboardy, and in fact it's quite difficult to fit flypacificblue.com on a E-Jet. But also, it's got the Pacific Blue on the tail too, apart from the Virgin. So the scheme actually does look quite different, and a substantial amount of kind of redesign on the aircraft. So it's not quite a remake of the same thing. It's not just a rebadge like the Aero Mexico Connect was. And this one I'm quite looking forward to getting hold of, actually. I think this is probably one of my favourite, or if not, the favourite model of the month for me. And I'm going to put this one up in the high flyer. The reason it's not getting into supersonic is because the mould, it's kind of a middling mould, isn't it? It's not spectacular. And I've reviewed the Virgin Blue version of this at the website. So if you haven't read that review, check that out. And you'll see what I mean when you read through that mould section about why the mould isn't perhaps as good as it might be. Most of the issues relate to the nose and the nose gear, to be honest. But beggars can't be choosers. This is probably my model of the month from the standard release set here, and a worthy high flyer. Now, there's just two models to discuss. One of the things you'll have noticed this month is that unlike a lot of months, there's not future models in this set. All of these models that I've talked about so far are models that have been made and are likely to be released quite soon. Their next model, however, is a future release and the only one this month, but it isn't particularly unusual or surprising. It is, of course, that Comac C919 that Air China have just introduced. So it's B919 X-Ray. There's not much to say on this. I'm kind of bored of talking about this one because it's been announced by Panda, it's been announced by NG, it's been announced by Phoenix, and now it's been released by JC Wings as well. And JC haven't released Air China C919 historically, so this isn't the first time that they've gone about to produce one. It's just the previous one was a fantasy registration. Yeah, I'm just going to put this one into Workhorse. I'm kind of, like I say, everyone else has announced it, everyone else is going to be releasing it. I'm kind of tired of talking about it. Okay, so that is 20 models out the way as quickly as I can, because none of them are really getting, you know, the blood pressure raised. They're all really pretty ordinary. Even the ones that are slipping into high flyer are really low ranking high flyers, I think. But much like last month where JC slipped out an extra model outside of the major announcements, they've done the same here as well. And there's been an announcement on the JC Facebook group that they are producing what is a really interesting model, and this is a 727-100. Now, it's been a long time since there has been a 727-100 release from Gemini or JC for starters, and this one is especially interesting because it was used in the 80s as a test bed for the General Electric unducted fan. So the starboard side engine has got a completely different engine attached to it with a new engine pylon and this big unducted fan with contra-rotating blades at the back. And I mean, it looks out of this world. It's really unusual and interesting, and the sort of model that we're just not seeing enough of in 400 scale. You know, it doesn't make up for the fact that there's barely any diversity of you know, airlines in this release set, or certainly ones that haven't been made before, or even models that haven't been made before. But it is pretty cool to see any brand really going out there and making these kind of unusual one-off models. And they're making this in 200 and 400 scale. The pictures here are of the 400 scale version. And it looks pretty good. In fact, it looks more than pretty good, doesn't it? Because, you know, I'm desperate for interesting models. Now, the 727-100 mold from Gemini JC is a solid, good mold. It's got a seam on it, you know, but hey, gonna get over that pretty quickly considering what you're getting here. This one looks like it will be super interesting and a really excellent model to release. And this one is clearly supersonic all day long, even though the mold has some weaknesses. I mean, it's got an unducted fan attached to it that looks pretty wicked. So, really good to see JC have still got this inquisitive curiosity to go out and make models which are unusually out there. And that does illustrate that Johan Chan, you know, is someone who does care about aviation. He's making more interesting models when he can, things that catch his eye and are interesting. It's just a shame that a lot of what they are producing is so generic and similar. But that, of course, is partly because of the way that JC release, in the sense that they produce a bulk of models, they split them into two halves, give one half a different registration to the other, and then wait 6 months to 2 years before they release the second one. Exactly the same thing that NG do, except NG just pump theirs out in the same month like idiots. So, yeah, it is the way it is. It's not all bad, you know, because if you missed out first time round, or if there's general demand across a period of time, it gives collectors a chance to pick them up. But it doesn't look great when you do these kind of ranking videos, because I'm just sitting here going, hey, they've made that one before. Hey, they've made that one before. Oh, look, they've made that one before. And they're not getting great scores. So it's not a spectacular set from JC, but there's a couple of models in here which are nice and curious and more interesting. For me, the Pacific Blue and that Boeing testbed 77 are obviously the top two models, but I am reasonably tempted by the British Midland, even though it's very similar to the old one. And that Flying Tiger 747 is, you know, wacky, but just the wrong type of aircraft for me for a Flying Tiger's release. Okay, well, that's my view on this month's JC Wings. What do you guys think? I guess the China Southern is quite handy because it's been, you know, potentially quite hard to get that unless you've got access to the Chinese market. So maybe that's good for some people. And maybe you missed out on some of the other models that have been made already here and are happy to begin the second shot at those. So chuck a comment on the video and I'd love to hear your views. But that's it from me this month, talking about the JC Wings releases for October. Okay, that's it from me. Bye, guys.